Get out of my store. The manager's voice cracked through the air like a whip-sharp, humiliating final. And then came it the slap. Open palm, loud public. It wasn't just skin against skin. It was dignity against prejudice. A black woman in a fitted orange dress stood motionless as her cheek turned under the strike. Her arms still folded, her eyes fixed. The crowd gasped. Phones lifted. A whisper cut through the silence. Did she just slap her? It was 11:42 a.m. inside Manhattan's most exclusive luxury boutique, and the manager in a red dress had just assaulted the wrong woman. She thought she was disciplining an unworthy intruder. What she didn't know was that the woman she struck was the most powerful black CEO in the industry, the billionaire majority shareholder of this very chain. But no one else in that store knew it yet. Right now, all they saw was one woman lashing out and another refusing to bow. "Don't just stand there," the manager barked at a clerk. "Security now. She doesn't belong here." Gasps rippled across the boutique. A young couple froze, fingers hovering above their phone screens. A mother pulled her daughter closer, whispering, "Watch. This is how they treat us." The CEO didn't move. She'd lived this scene before at 25 in Atlanta when a clerk told her, "This isn't your kind of place." At 32 in Los Angeles when a hotel manager sneered at her ID, convinced it had to be fake. Now decades later, billions later, here it was again. Same prejudice, same venom, different disguise. She inhaled, calm, still anchored like steel in the storm. "You heard me," the manager shouted, her voice slicing through the tension. "Out before I have you dragged." Silence followed thick, heavy, then a murmur. Phones rose higher, a teenage boy whispered, "This is going viral." That was the moment. Stillness versus rage, silence versus spectacle. The woman in orange finally spoke. Her words came quiet but razor sharp. "Number, you're the scene." The slap had landed, but Thestry hadn't even begun. "Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe." These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now back to her. The air inside the boutique was no longer luxurious. It was electric. Customers who had been quietly browsing watches and handbags now stood frozen, their eyes darting between the woman in the red dress, the store manager, and the one she had just slapped. The woman in orange, she hadn't walked in with designer logos stitched across her body. No diamonds flashing on her fingers. No entourage trailing behind, just a fitted orange dress, clean lines, no excess. A subtle black clutch in her hand, heels low enough for comfort, high enough for presence. Her hair pulled back in ass style that spoke of efficiency, not vanity. To most, she looked like a woman shopping far above her pay grade. To those who truly knew power, she looked like something else entirely control, disguised as simplicity. But no one here recognized her yet. Not the clerks whispering near the jewelry case. Not the manager who had just assaulted her. Not even the security guard being rushed from the back room. And that was intentional because this morning was a test. The woman in orange, her name was Ava Coleman, had come without announcement, without her executive assistant, without corporate insignia. She was not here to flaunt. She was here to see for herself. For weeks, she'd been receiving quiet complaints from customers who felt dismissed, profiled, treated like frauds inside these stores. Nothing too loud, nothing viral yet, but enough to raise suspicion. And if there's one thing Ava never ignored, it was a pattern. So, she arrived in silence, walked through the glass doors alone. No black car idling at the curb. No assistant carrying shopping bags ahead of her, just Ava herself. A billionaire CEO hidden in plain sight, and in less than 5 minutes, the test had confirmed everything. The manager's smirk, the slap, the order to get out were not random outbursts. They were proof. Proof of what happened when the cameras weren't there. Proof of what Hermione couldn't disguise, but her silence could expose. Now Ava stood still, calm as stone, letting the moment breathe around her. She folded her arms tighter, not in defense, but in patience. Patience for the storm she knew would only grow. "Ma'am, you need to leave," a younger sales clerk urged nervously, his voice cracking. He was maybe 23, hair neatly parted, suit a size too big. His eyes darted to the crowd, then back to the manager as if caught between two masters. "Don't call her ma'am," the manager snapped. "She doesn't deserve that courtesy." The cruelty was casual, like she'd said it 100 times before. Ava blinked slowly. She'd heard those tones at 25 when her first real estate commission had been frozen under suspicion of fraud. She'd heard them again at 32 when a hotel clerk refused to hand over keys to the suite she'd already paid for. The words changed. The faces rotated, but the dismissal was always the same. You don't belong. You can't afford this. Someone like, you can't possibly own this space. And here it was again, recycled in red silk. The younger clerk swallowed but said nothing more. A woman near the perfume counter whispered, "That's foul," her hand gripping the strap of her purse like a lifeline. Another customer, a tall black man in a navy suit, shook his head in disbelief. "You can't be serious," he muttered toward the manager. "She hasn't even done anything." "Mind your business," the manager barked, eyes cold. "This store has standards." Ava didn't flinch. She didn't need to. The crowd was starting to feel the imbalance for her. From the corner of her eye, she noticed a teenage boy fumbling with his phone, hitting record. His friend whispered, "This is crazy." "She's not even fighting back." Exactly, Ava thought. That's the point. Across the boutique, a security guard in a navy blazer emerged from the back. Broad shoulders, stern face, earpiece buzzing. He approached with purpose, already scanning Ava as if she were a problem. "Ma'am," he said, voice flat, "I'm going to have to escort you out." "She's not a guest," the manager interjected, her tone dripping with contempt. "She's a fraud. Tried to bluff her way in here." "Escort her," the manager demanded again. The guard nodded once, stepping closer, but Ava stood rooted, anchored, as if the marble floor itself had chosen her. Her voice, when it came, was quiet, but sharp enough to cut. "You don't know who I am," the manager laughed. A dry, bitter sound. "And I don't care. Out now," the crowd shifted. Murmurs rising. "Phones up higher now." Little red dots of recording lights glowing from every angle. What began as humiliation was fast becoming a spectacle. Ava let her gaze travel across the store. Rows of handbags, glass cases filled with jewelry, shoppers turned witnesses, her lips pressed into a calm line. This was no longer about a slap. This was about exposure, about showing what had been hidden under policy and standards. "Call corporate if you want," the manager sneered. "They'll back me." They always do. Ava's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, a hint of steel edged her voice. "Number. They'll back me." The words landed differently, heavy, uneasy. The manager blinked, her smirk faltering for just a second. Ava slipped one hand into her clutch and tapped her phone. Assailant signal. In an office uptown, her executive assistant screen lit up. Protocol was already in motion. Every word, every insult, every action was now logged and time-stamped. But here in this boutique, no one knew yet. The security guard hesitated, eyes flicking between the manager's orders and the woman's unshaken stance. The tension pulled taut, a string ready to snap. The crowd leaned in, waiting, recording, breathing in the storm, and Ava Coleman, the powerful black CEO, standing in silence, let it all build. Because sometimes silence is not submission. Sometimes silence is the drumbeat before the reckoning. The boutique was no longer quiet. It pulsed with tension, phones raised, whispers swirling, the slap still echoing across marble. And yet, the manager pressed on, her voice sharpened by arrogance, not shame. "She's a fraud," she barked, pointing at Ava as if conviction could become fact. "I've seen this trick before. Flashy confidence, fake cards, fake names. They walk in. They pose like they belong, and then they vanish the second we ask for proof." A ripple of unease spread through the shoppers. Some frowned. Others looked down at their shoes, complicit in silence. But a young woman near the handbag display muttered under her breath, "You don't know who she is." The manager turned on her, eyes flaring. The enemy. Unmasked. "Excuse me?" The woman swallowed but stood her ground. "She hasn't even done anything. You just security." The manager cut her off. "Remove her. And if anyone else thinks they can interrupt, they'll be escorted out too." The guard shifted, uncomfortable, but said nothing. Ava didn't move. Her silence, her composure was louder than any defense. But inside, she remembered. She remembered 25, 32, 50 moments like this. Each one folded neatly into her memory like evidence waiting for trial. Today, the trial had arrived. Another clerk chimed in from behind the jewelry case, arms crossed. That card she flashed, it could have been stolen. Happens all the time. "Do you know how much theft we deal with?" The words carried, reaching the ears of a boy recording near the entrance. He shook his head. "That's not theft. That's profiling. The manager's smirk widened, mistaking the murmurs for authority. You all really think she could afford this place? Look at her. Does she look like a client? The cruelty hung heavy in the air. A man in a navy suit exhaled sharply. This is foul. She's not the problem, you are. But the manager didn't blink. She leaned closer, her voice dripping venom. People like her don't belong here, not in my store. Gasps, a collective shiver. Even the security guard's jaw tightened. Ava raised her eyes at last, meeting the manager's stare. Her voice came low, steady, cutting through the haze. You've mistaken patience for weakness. The crowd stilled, phones lifted higher. And in that suspended silence, it became clear this wasn't just a confrontation anymore. It was a reckoning waiting to unfold. The store had stopped being a boutique. It felt more like an arena, every eye fixed on the two women standing at its center. The manager in red, breath quick and furious, and Ava Coleman in orange, arms folded, face unreadable. The insult still lingered in the air. People like her don't belong here, and yet Ava didn't argue. She didn't shout. She didn't plead. She stood, anchored like the marble floor beneath her was carved from the same stone as her will. The manager mistook it for hesitation. She smirked, brushing invisible dust from her dress, her tone dripping with condescension. See? Nothing to say because you know I'm right. But the silence was not surrender. It was fire without smoke. A man by the entrance whispered to his wife. She's not even flinching. Not once. His wife nodded, eyes wide. That's what makes it worse. She's calm, but they're tearing her apart. The security guard shifted uneasily, glancing at Ava, then at the cluster of customers recording. For the first time, doubt flickered across his face. Ava inhaled slowly, steady, controlled. In her mind, a memory replayed the first time she'd been thrown out of a luxury store at 25. She had walked in with her first commission check, proud and nervous, only to be told she couldn't afford the air inside. She left humiliated, but that night she promised herself never again. Every slight, every dismissal, every rejection, she carried them not as scars but as fuel. And now, decades later, that fuel was fire held in silence. The young clerk, the one with the ill-fitting suit, shifted his weight. His voice wavered. Maybe we should check her ID again. The manager spun on him, fury sharp. Are you questioning me? He froze, lips pressed tight, retreating into silence. Ava's gaze followed him, calm, but knowing she didn't need his defense. She already had the truth, and the truth was patient. The tension thickened. Customers whispered, phones buzzed, live streams climbed in viewers. A teenage girl watching from the corner typed furiously into her feed, "This is happening live. Manager just slapped a black woman for existing in a luxury store." The word spread instantly, a digital echo that Ava couldn't hear but would soon feel. Still, she stood silent. The manager sneered again, louder this time, trying to reclaim the room. "Security, drag her out if you have to. She's wasting our time." The guard hesitated. His hand hovered near Ava's arm, but never touched. He glanced at the crowd. Half a dozen phones raised, the moment he revealed who he really was, red recording lights burning like tiny spotlights. His jaw tightened. He didn't move. Ava's eyes flicked to him briefly, then back to the manager. One slow blink, no words. It was enough. Enough to make the silence louder than the shouting. Enough to shift the weight of the room. A woman near the perfume counter finally spoke, her voice carrying in the tense quiet. "She doesn't look like the problem here." "You do." The crowd stirred, murmur swelling. The balance was tipping, and still Ava hadn't raised her voice once. She didn't need to. Her silence was the storm before the strike. And everyone in that store could feel at the inevitability that power once revealed would change everything. The boutique had turned into a stage, and the audience was no longer silent. Phones were raised higher now, recording every second, as if the world outside these glass walls was waiting to judge the outcome. Near the handbag display, a college-aged girl pressed record and whispered, "This is discrimination." Her friend leaned in, eyes wide. "Post it. People need to see." Seconds later, the clip was on TikTok with the caption, "Luxury store manager just slapped a black woman for nothing." Across the room, a middle-aged man adjusted his phone camera, aiming straight at the manager. "I've got this from another angle," he muttered. Hissy Atmate at the watch counter nodded. Good. The truth has to come out. The manager noticed the red recording lights and snapped. Put those phones away. This is private property. But the words had no weight anymore. The crowd wasn't with her. The young clerk, still fidgeting with his too large suit, glanced at Ava, then back at the glowing phones. He looked torn, his lips parting as if to speak, then closing again under the weight of fear. It was a young mother who finally cut through the tension. Holding her daughter's hand, she said firmly, "I saw her card. It was real." "You tore it up." Gasps. A ripple of recognition passed through the crowd. The manager's face flushed, her voice turning shrill. "Lies. You're all being manipulated. She doesn't belong here." But the crowd wasn't buying it anymore. Ava remained silent, arms folded, her gaze steady as the tide shifted around her. She hadn't lifted a hand in defense, hadn't raised her voice, but the witnesses had begun to speak for her. From the back, a man in a suit raised his phone and said loudly enough for all to hear, "This is going online right now. The whole world's about to see how you treat customers." The security guard's shoulders stiffened. He looked at the manager, then at the dozen recording lights. He didn't move. Ava finally exhaled, the sound soft, controlled, like steel cooling in fire. She didn't need to say a word. The witnesses were saying it for her. And for the first time since the slap, the manager's confidence faltered. Her power, once absolute in this boutique, was slipping away, recorded, posted, judged in real time. The witnesses had chosen their side, and it wasn't hers. The manager's voice rose, shrill against the heavy silence. "Turn those cameras off. She's not a customer. She's a scammer." Her finger jabbed the air toward Ava, each word louder, harsher, trying to bury her own fear under the weight of authority. But no one lowered their phones. If anything, more were raised. "You all think this is funny?" she snapped. "Do you know how many times we've had fakes walk in here? People dressed up pretending they can afford this. This is policy, my policy." The irony of her last words hung thick. My policy. The young mother by the handbag shook her head. Policy doesn't include hitting someone. Gasps followed. And the crowd stirred again. Ava remained still, her arms folded. Her gaze the calm before the strike anchored on the manager. She hadn't moved since the slap. Hadn't given an inch. Her silence felt heavier than the manager's shouting, each second stretching like a drumbeat. The security guard stepped closer, his jaw tight. "Ma'am," he said cautiously, "we need to resolve this. Maybe just leather. Enough." The manager cut him off, red-faced. "If you won't do your job, I will. Out." She turned back to Ava, eyes blazing. "You don't belong here. You never did. People like you." Her words sliced off, unfinished, but the meaning was clear. The crowd's murmurs sharpened into outrage. A man in a suit near the door said loudly, "We all heard that. You can't take it back." Phones captured every syllable. Ava finally moved. Not a step forward, not a gesture of anger, just a slow, deliberate blink. It was enough. Enough to remind anyone watching that silence wasn't submission. It was calculation. The manager misread it, smirking again as if she'd won. "See, she has nothing to say because she knows she doesn't belong." But the silence was louder than her voice now. Ava exhaled, calm, controlled. Inside, she remembered another night years ago when she was 25 and left standing outside a boutique in the rain. Card rejected not because of numbers, but because of her skin. That memory had built the empire she carried now. And if this manager thought today was just another repeat, she was about to learn how wrong she was. The store buzzed with tension, customers whispering, cameras recording, witnesses shifting from quiet shock to active resistance. And still, Ava stood silent because sometimes the most dangerous answer is no answer at all. The room's air had thickened to glass, fragile, tense, ready to shatter. The manager's voice tore through it again, shrill with desperation. "If you won't leave, then we'll make you." She lunged forward, snatching the slim black clutch from Ava's hand. Gasps rippled like waves. The manager held it up high for all to see, her eyes gleaming with self-righteousness. "Let's see what's inside," she sneered. "Probably fake cards, stolen IDs." "That's what people like her carry," the crowd erupted. "That's theft," someone shouted. Another voice echoed, "You can't do that." Phones angled higher, recording every humiliating second. Ava's face remained still, eyes locked on the clutch, now dangling in her accuser's grip. She didn't lunge to reclaim it. She didn't beg. She simply stood, her silence weighing heavier with each breath. The manager's fingers dug inside the bag, pulling out a sleek matte black card, holding it aloft with a mocking laugh. "Oh, look, a premium card. How original. I've seen fakes like this a dozen times." She flicked it against her palm. The sound sharp, careless, meant to degrade. "Nothing but a prop." A murmur spread through the witnesses. A young man near the entrance said loudly, "That's a platinum executive. Those aren't fake." His voice trembled with disbelief. The manager ignored him, turning towards security. "Call the police!" "She's a fraud, and I have proof right here." The word police hit the room like thunder. The mother with her daughter pulled her child closer, fear flashing in her eyes. Others exchanged uneasy glances. Everyone knew what that call implied. The security guard froze, his radio in hand, eyes flicking between the manager and the woman in orange. He didn't press the button. Not yet. The manager grew louder, her voice echoing through the boutique. "Fraud thief. Out of my store before I have you arrested." The crowd stirred, the whispers turning sharp, angry. A teenage girl raised her phone higher, whispering into her live stream. "She's lying. She stole her bag. This is insane." Through it all, Ava stood still. Her silence now wasn't just composure. It was defiance carved into stone. And when she finally spoke, her voice was low, precise, every syllable cutting through the manager's frenzy like glass breaking on tile. "You just crossed the line you can't come back from." The boutique fell silent. The clutch still dangled in the manager's hand, but the power in the room had already shifted, invisible, unstoppable. The boutique had fallen into a brittle silence. The clutch still hung from the manager's hand, the stolen card glinting beneath the lights. Around them, phones kept rolling, red dots glowing like the eyes of judgment. Ava didn't reach for her bag. She didn't lunge for the card. Instead, she lifted her phone from the marble counter where it rested. Her movement slow, deliberate. With a single swipe, she unlocked the screen. "Claire," she said calmly, her voice low but firm, carrying through the room with an authority that didn't need volume. On the other end, miles away in a midtown office, her executive assistant's voice came sharp and immediate. "Yes, Miss Coleman." "Protocol engaged." "Engage?" Ava replied. "Log this incident. Secure the footage. Begin the audit." Her words weren't shouted, but they cut deeper than any scream. The manager blinked, the first crack of uncertainty flickering in her eyes. Claire's voice came again. "Steady, clinical, timestamp confirmed. Systems live. Every camera, every word. Do you want me to alert the board?" Ava's gaze never left the manager. "Yes, alert them. Send copies of this feed to every regional director. I want the chain of custody airtight." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The words board and regional director weren't the vocabulary of a helpless customer. They were the language of ownership, of power. The manager's grip faltered slightly on the clutch, but she forced a laugh. "You really expect us to believe you're someone important? This is an act, a stunt." Ava's silence in response was louder than any argument. She lowered her phone, her face calm, her posture unshaken. Claire's voice cut through again, audible to anyone close enough. "Corporate security has been notified. I'll have confirmation within 3 minutes." A murmur ran through the crowd. A young man whispered, "Wait, she's not bluffing. She's really somebody." The manager's smile twitched. Uneasy now, she thrust the clutch back toward Ava as if it burned her fingers. "Take your little bag. It proves nothing, but it was too late." The tide was shifting. The witnesses had seen the theft, the insult, the threats, and now they'd heard the calm, controlled call to power. Ava took the clutch back slowly, her eyes never leaving the manager's face. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply said, "This is no longer your store. Not for long." And in that moment, the boutique felt different, as though the foundation beneath the marble floor had begun to crack. The boutique felt suspended, every second stretched thin. Phones hovered in the air like a constellation of unblinking eyes. The manager's smirk had begun to fracture, but she clung to it. Desperate. "You're nothing," she hissed. "A fraud with a good act. No one here believes you," but the room told a different story. Dozens of witnesses, dozens of recordings, every glance, every whisper, every raised phone leaned toward Ava, not the woman in red. Ava slipped her clutch back under her arm. Her voice came low, steady, deliberate. measured in the way only someone with nothing left to prove could speak. "You think you've humiliated me," she said, "but what you've really done is expose yourself." The manager scoffed, but it was brittle now. "Expose myself, please. You're a trespasser." "You're done here." Ava let the silence stretch a beat longer. Then she unfolded her arms, straightened her posture, and delivered the words that would break the room in half. "This chain, these stores, you work in them. I own them." It landed like thunder. Gasps cracked the air. The teenage boy filming dropped his phone for a second before fumbling to pick it up again. The young mother clapped a hand over her mouth. Even the security guard's eyes went wide, his hand falling from the radio at his hip. The manager froze, color draining from her face. You're lying." Ava didn't flinch. She pulled her phone back up, tapped once, and turned the screen outward. On it glowed a secured corporate portal, her name displayed beside a title impossible to dispute. Ava Coleman, Chief Executive Officer, Majority Shareholder. Gasps deepened. The crowd murmured louder, voices clashing in disbelief and awe. "She's the CEO," someone whispered. "She owns the whole company," another answered. The teenage girl live streaming shouted into her phone. She wasn't bluffing. "She's the owner." Comments began flooding in real time. "Shut the chain down. Fire that manager. Justice right now." The manager's lips trembled, searching for words, but none came. Her eyes darted around the store, landing on the staff who had once stood behind her. Their faces were pale now, uncertain, recoiling from the woman who had led them into this disaster. Ava stepped forward, one slow step across the marble, her presence heavier than the slap that started it all. She met the manager's eyes with calm steel. "You slapped me in front of witnesses," she said. "You stole my property. You called me a fraud in a store that exists because of me, and you did it all with certainty, because you thought your prejudice was policy." The silence that followed was total. Even the hum of the air conditioner felt louder than the breathless stillness of the crowd. Ava lowered her phone, her voice sharp as glass. "You didn't just insult a customer. You insulted your employer, your owner, your future." The room shifted. Everyone knew the reckoning had begun. The revelation hung in the air like a verdict. Ava Coleman, CEO, owner. The words had stripped the room bare, leaving only raw truth behind. The manager's face drained of color, the confidence that had fueled every insult now dissolving into panic. Her hand trembled as she slowly lowered the stolen card onto the counter, as if returning stolen evidence might undo what had just been witnessed. "No, this can't be," she stammered. You're lying." "There's no way." But the crowd wasn't with her anymore. The teenage boy filming whispered into his phone. "You're seeing this live. Manager just found out she slapped her boss." The comments exploded. "Fire her! Shut it down!" "She deserves nothing less." The young mother stepped forward again, her voice firm, resolute. "I told you that card was real. You tore it up. Now everyone knows the truth." The clerk in the oversized suit looked sick, sweat beading on his forehead. He stared at the floor, unable to meet Ava's eyes. His silence was its own confession. The security guard shifted, his jaw clenched, shame flickering in his expression. He muttered quietly, almost to himself, "I should have stopped this." The other employees edged backward, distancing themselves from the manager as if proximity might taint them. Their smirks were gone, replaced with pale unease. The crowd, though, began to lean forward, not hostile, not fearful, but aligned. A man near the watch counter clapped once sharply. Another followed. Then a small ripple of applause rose in the boutique. Not for the slap, not for the insults, but for the woman who had stood silent, endured it all, and revealed her truth at the exact right moment. The applause faded into a tense hush. The kind that comes before judgment is past. All eyes locked on Ava. The manager clung to the counter, her breath shallow, her once sharp eyes now wide with fear. "Miss Coleman, please," she tried, her voice cracking. "It was a mistake. I didn't know who you were." Ava stepped closer, heels clicking softly against the marble. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "That's exactly the problem," she said, her tone flat, steady. "You never cared to know." The words hit like a gavel. The manager flinched as if struck again. Claire's voice returned through Ava's phone, cold and efficient. "Confirm termination. Remove access immediately." The manager's phone, tucked in her pocket, vibrated once. She pulled it out with shaking hands and stared at the screen. Access denied glowed in bold red. Her credentials, her schedule, her emails, everything gone in a blink. Her knees buckled. She slumped against the counter, the stolen card sliding from her fingers and clattering onto the marble like evidence. "Victoria Hayes," Ava said aloud, addressing the manager by name for the first time in that moment. The name landed and the room absorbed it as if the sound itself had weight. "You slapped me in a public space. You stole from me. You accused me of fraud. That's not policy. That's prejudice disguised as procedure. Effective immediately, terminated." "Remove her keys, her badge, her access." Claire's voice confirmed each action as Ava spoke. "Processing now across the boutique. Emily Carter, Daniel Brooks, disable their accounts. Block all credentials. Notify HR and corporate security. Begin the audit for this location. Preserve all footage." At those names, two clerks who had earlier exchanged smirks felt their devices buzz and die in their hands. One of them, the clerk in the oversized suit, paled, his mouth opening as his login failed. He dropped his phone on the counter and stepped back as if burned. Gasps and cheers rippled around the boutique. The shift was total. The staff who had been confident minutes before now looked hollow, unmoored. The security guard, who had hesitated when the manager first ordered him to remove Ava, looked down at the radio in his hand with shame on his face. "I should have stopped this," he muttered, barely audible. A woman near the perfume counter wiped her eyes. A teenage boy filming whispered into his phone, stunned. "She fired them. She really fired them live." Victoria tried to speak, plead, bargain, anything to undo the cascade, but the words fell into the vacuum Ava's authority had created. "Miss Coleman, please," Victoria said again, each syllable thinner than the last. "I'll change. I'll apologize. Don't ruin me." "You thought dignity was optional," Ava replied, voice steady but not cruel. "You treated people as if they were problems to be solved rather than human beings to be respected. That's not something a training seminar fixes. That's a culture problem." She turned, giving the room a sweep as if cataloging every face, every witness, every phone that had captured the moment. "Shut this location down," she told Claire. "Effective tonight. Reopen only when every face inside knows the meaning of respect." "Confirmed," Claire replied crisply. The staff's terminals displayed final notices, temporary closure, mandatory retraining, full audit of interactions, and incident reports. Customers exchanged looks. Some applauded softly, others cried. The boutique's marble floor felt different now, clean but chastened, as if the space itself had been corrected. Ava slipped the clutch under her arm, her posture unbent, carrying the day's gravity like a quiet crown. She didn't gloat. She didn't mock. She allowed the silence to settle in the wake of the revelation, letting the witnesses own the story. People parted for her as she made her way to the door, not out of fear, but out of something closer to reverence. A man beside the watch display murmured, "We saw it happen." A young mother clung to her child, whispering, "That was for all of us." At the glass doors, Ava paused and glanced back over the shop one final time. Victoria Hayes still leaned against the counter, crestfallen, while Emily Carter and Daniel Brooks stood with their heads lowered, each grappling with the suddenness of their dismissal. The security guard's shoulders slumped. The crowd's phones continued to stream, upload, and judge. The clip's reach was already extending beyond the boutique's glass walls into feeds and timelines. "You thought my silence was weakness," Ava said softly, words carrying across the room. "That's your mistake. My silence was choice. Choice is power." There was no flourish, only the precise delivery of someone for whom restraint was strategy and consequence an inevitability. She stepped out into the sunlight. The noise of the city folded around her, indifferent and immediate. People on the street glanced in as the doors slid closed behind her. Some craned their necks to watch the aftermath. Others continued on with errands. Ava walked to the curb where a plain, unmarked car waited. No black sedan, no entourage, only a brief professional nod to the driver. Claire's voice chimed again in her ear. All feeds archived. PR drafting statement. Legal standing by. Good, Ava said. Ensure the message is clear. Dignity isn't negotiable. Begin outreach to customers who reported incidents. I want community liaisons set for the reopened store. Her instructions were methodical, not vindictive, designed to heal, to rebuild, to make sure what had happened could not repeat. As the car pulled away, the live feeds kept amplifying the clip, fragments of the encounter stitched into timelines and comment threads. Hashtags formed within minutes. Calls for justice echoed through shared posts. People replayed the moment the card was branded as proof, the split second after the slap, the pause before power was revealed. The narrative spread fast. A manager's prejudiced certainty undone by the very person she believed she could humiliate. Across the city, viewers watched, debated, and some even recorded themselves retelling the scene to others. A single incident sparking a broader conversation about respect, ownership, and accountability in spaces where power had long been assumed rather than earned. Inside the boutique, staff who remained watched their screens idle and thought about the assumptions they had accepted as truth. In one corner, a young clerk wiped tears from his face, shame and relief mingling. The mother who had stood up earlier stayed until the doors closed, holding her daughter's hand like a talisman. She had witnessed something that would become a memory she'd return to when explaining dignity to the child she loved. Later that night, statements were released, a formal apology from Ava to the patrons for the experience they'd witnessed, a corporate promise to root out discriminatory behaviors, immediate steps to retrain staff and review policies. Commentary pieces debated the spectacle and the power dynamics. Some praised Ava's restraint, arguing that her composure made the moment more devastating to witness. Others argued that the spectacle of power was necessary to undo entrenched prejudice. But for those who had been in the boutique that day, it wasn't just a headline. It was an embodied lesson. The people who had watched phones in hand were now part of the narrative. The mother who had pulled her daughter closer had a story to tell about dignity. The teenage boy who had filmed the clip would later scroll back through his feed and feel the strange twinge of participating in a moment that mattered. As for Victoria Hayes, Emily Carter, and Daniel Brooks, the consequences were immediate and irreversible. HR follow-ups, termination letters, revoked credentials, these were administrative facts. But beyond the paperwork was the deeper, harder reckoning, that their small choices had real impact, that a casual cruelty they'd mistaken for policy had consequences when seen by enough eyes. Ava Coleman's name trended that night, not just for the spectacle, but for what she chose to do with the power she possessed. She could have punished privately, fired in a back office, swept the incident under corporate rugs. Instead, by letting witnesses record and by mobilizing her authority publicly and precisely, she used the moment to create accountability that could not be silenced. The next morning, the boutique remained closed. A small sign in the window read, "Temporarily closed for staffing review and training." Beneath it, someone had scribbled in a Sharpie, "Respect first." The note was unsigned, anonymous, but it captured the shift the day had produced, a reset of expectations placed on those who served and those who shopped. And in the weeks that followed, the story kept unfolding in ways both small and consequential. Policies were rewritten. Training modules were updated with real footage and real testimony. Community panels were scheduled. Customers who had once felt dismissed were invited into dialogues about store practices. The company announced measures to ensure audits, customer feedback channels, and regular sensitivity training, steps that had been talked about for years but rarely implemented with urgency. For Ava, the event was not a triumph, but a continuation of the long labor of reminding institutions that dignity is the baseline. She returned to work, to meetings, to decisions about product lines and corporate strategy, but the day in the boutique lingered in the company's memory like an indent on a polished surface. It was a marker, an instance where the routines of a business were disrupted and asked to bend toward justice. In the quiet moments afterwards, Ava thought back to the younger versions of herself. The 25-year-old with the first commission check. The 32-year-old refused a hotel key, and she felt the odd mix of sorrow and resolve that such memory brings. She had built an empire for many reasons, but at the core had always been the promise that the next generation of young women of all colors would find fewer doors shut on them for reasons that had nothing to do with merit. The boutique reopened months later with new staff, stricter policies, and an orientation that began with an unambiguous statement about respect. People noticed the difference, and some returned with cautious optimism. Changes were imperfect, and the work of undoing prejudice continued. But the incident had pushed the chain in a new direction, and when people asked Ava about the day, why she hadn't made a scene sooner, why she had chosen to stay silent until the exact moment, she answered simply, "Silence isn't always surrender. Sometimes it's strategy. Sometimes it's the space needed for the truth to land." Dignity had spoken louder than prejudice. The memory of the slap remained, but it no longer belonged to the woman who had struck. It belonged to the woman who had refused to be reduced by it, and to the witnesses who, with phones and courage, turned an act of humiliation into a reckoning.